Okay, so hello there and welcome to Flash Day 1. So we're just going to get started right away. I'm going to go over tools and, sort of how to draw things in this first part, and then we're going to go over a couple other things in the second part. So first off, when you open Flash, you've got a lot of grayed out stuff because we need to sort of start a project before we get going. You might have a dialog box open here. If you don't, you just go File, New, and something similar to the dialog box that was already up will be there. Most of these settings we can change afterwards if you'd like to. So for example, we have width. I usually want it to be at least 1,000. The height, I'm putting 800 just to give me some space to work in. That default of 550 by 400 is very small. Don't worry about frame rate or background color. We'll be dealing with those things later. But one of the big things that you need to make sure you do correctly right from the start, because you can't change it afterwards, is the file type. Flash has a lot of different sort of systems it can work in, HTML5, WebGL, Air, depending on what you're building. Because we're going to be learning basic concepts of animation, we kind of want all of the tools available to us. And that means starting with Action Scripting 3.0, which means we can do any of the types of animation and things that are pretty much available everywhere. And then if you were working in with more advanced stuff, you could, kind of pare things down and understand that. But that's later. Right now, we just want Action Scripting 3.0. And we hit OK. And this white area that comes up, this is your workspace. This is where things go. Now, before we actually do anything, I want to change the layout of my window, because in class it's going to look different because of the projector where things are sitting. I go up to Window, Workspaces, Classic, and give it a second. There we go. And the reason I do this is that it separates the tools from all the properties, and the timeline being up at the top means more people can see it, right? This is just a matter of logistics, but I don't want you guys to get confused when you come to class and things look different, right? But we have all our tools on the right. A lot of these will look familiar if you've used Photoshop or Illustrator. Basically, the top part is navigating and selecting things. Then the next section is lots of drawing tools. Then there's some more advanced tools. You might have seen that I did this. Hold down the space bar and you'll be able to, it's called the pan tool. And you can kind of pan across your work area. You will be able to see anything that you draw in the dark gray space. It's just it won't show up if you render or output to HTML or anything like that. Right, so tools, workspace, and then over here are the properties for anything that's selected. Right now, I just click on the background, and so it's actually the document properties that we see, right? It's the size I put in, the background color, frames per second. I said before we could change just about anything. If you were to select a drawing tool, say the rectangle tool, you will get all the settings for that tool. If you select something that you've drawn that's in here, everything will come up there. And the last part is where it says timeline. Now, we're going to be dealing with the timeline more later. Suffice it to say that each frame represents a moment in time, and your time marker would play through, and you would see your animation play. The part we're going to be dealing with today is the layers section right here, because this is the part that acts a little bit like Photoshop or Illustrator. You can have multiple layers, keep your background separate from your characters, separate from your text, etc., etc. And layers will get very important with animation. Alright, but first off, let's try and draw something. Your guys' settings are going to be different than mine because I've used this before. Whenever you select any of these drawing tools, there are a few settings that show up here. And you'll see that they're kind of segmented, right? There's these settings, which have to do with the color. And then there's a couple settings down here. We'll get to the bottom ones here. But the ones that are in the middle, these are the same as over here, right? Same. Black, blue, black, blue. And they just have to do with how this square is going to be drawn, or rectangle in this case, right? So I draw a rectangle, I could draw another rectangle, I could draw another rectangle. You can see how you can start to build things. But I want to take a very close look at how these rectangles are, because these are vector shapes, meaning you have an anchor point, you have an anchor point. Let me get my selection tool here. Anchor point, and then the computer draws a line between those anchor points, which means you can zoom in ad infinitum, right? I can just keep zooming. I'm at 400%, 1600%, 2000%, and it still looks perfect. Any pixelation you guys see on this video is the video, not the actual program. If you do this yourself in the program, you're going to see that there's nothing there, right? So that's a great thing about vector stuff. If I go up to my selection tool here, that's what allows me to select things. You'll see when I select it, kind of turns that weird spotted color. But there's some differences between this and Illustrator, and this is where things get weird, and that's actually what the first class had to do with. If I click this and I move it, you'll see that the outline leaves. It doesn't go with it. Flash considers the outline separate from the fill. Strange, right? Get stranger. If I select this part right here, you'll see the other three parts don't get selected. Now, if it's curved, it considers it, you know, if I got an oval right here, right? The whole curve gets selected, but when it's these straight lines, it considers it 4 different lines. Now I can double click and get the whole thing, right? And then I can, you know, I can change the color of it once I get the whole thing selected. That's a terrible color to change it to for an example because you can't see that. There we go. But already you can see that things are behaving very strangely, right? Then let me get rid of this. Also, if you double click on a shape, then you will get both the fill and we call it the stroke or line. Right? So if I double click this and successfully select everything, I can go over here and I can change this, the color, I can change the color of the outline, I can change the stroke, that's how big it is, right? So I can make it, you know, kind of silly size here. There's also other more advanced things that you can change, but generally speaking, it's the color and the line width. Here's the tricky thing. If you're like, oh, if you select this, right? I select this here and I say, okay, I'm gonna, you know, make another shape, and I go over here to make another shape. And then I go, but I want this shape to be a different color. And you'll see it changed the shape of this one. You have to be careful. Flash pays very close attention to what you have selected. So you have to kind of click off, right? Click somewhere on the background. That's what I mean when I say click off. And then you can grab another tool and then you can draw that. Another way in which Flash is very, very picky is that if you do not have this selected and you click and drag, it does this. Sort of a vague bending of the curve. And it seems like, oh, that's easy. I can change the size of a curve really easily. Well, yeah, but you can't see where the anchor points are, which means you can't, so you can see on this curved one here, I can't necessarily control this the way I want to, right? Like I want this to curve inward, but instead it's moving the whole thing. So this can kind of get weird really fast. If you want to move something, you actually have to select it. In this case, double click because I want both, and then click and drag it again. So Flash looks very closely at, is the thing selected or not, so that when you click on it to move it, it can do two different things. And we're just getting started with how things are different. So I'm going to get rid of this line because I don't want this line, and I'm going to get rid of this line because I don't want it. And I want to show you what happens when two of these fills intersect, because Flash considers them to be, they're vectors, right? So there are anchor points that exist here, 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 and here that are drawing this shape. So it is like Illustrator. However, anyone who's used Photoshop knows if you put one thing on top of another, that's it, that those things are, you know, melded and they cut into each other. If I put this here and I click off and then I go to move this, I get this. Flash's default drawing is very different than you are used to. This is not like usual vector drawing. There is a way to fix it, but we need to understand this first, right? So when two shapes intersect, they will do that. Same with two lines, actually. If two lines intersect like this, not all the time. I'm not honestly sure what the rules are for that, because sometimes they seem to intersect and sometimes they don't. And now I'm not even getting to move it because, oh yeah, see, now it's considered a compound line. And if I try to click, there it is. That's what got intersected. This one, oh, no, that one got intersected too. See?